Welcome everyone. Before watching this video, it is suggested to watch previous video about section 169. You can find link of video in description. Keep in mind the simple example of Mr. A and Mr. B discussed in that previous video. Let's now talk about today's topic. Section 154. This section is about exports. Let's go to tax regime link. And then click on this green box. Now we are on a slide which is about section 169. From here click on link for our today's discussion. Before we get into the taxation provisions, let's talk a little about the business aspects. The exports business can be established in any area of Pakistan. To facilitate exporters, Export Processing Zone Authority was established in 1980. Its main objective was to increase and improve exports of Pakistan. There are a number of incentives available to exporters if they set up their business in Export Processing Zone. You can pause the video to read it. There are also a number of facilities available to exporters, such as one-window simplified procedures, facilitation desk, clearing and forwarding services, availability of utilities, and many more. You can pause the video to read it. There are 7 export processing zones, which are operational right now. These export processing zones are Karachi Export Processing Zone, Sialkot Export Processing Zone, Rizalpur Export Processing Zone, Gujranwala Export Processing Zone, Saindak Export Processing Zone, Dudar Export Processing Zone, and Tawerki Steel Mill Export Processing Zone. First thing to learn is that your business could be in any of these export processing zones, or it could be outside the export processing zone. Keep this point in your mind. We will use it later. There are 2 types of exporters. One is direct exporter and second is indirect exporter. A direct exporter is one who himself exports the product, and an indirect exporter is one who supplies product to direct exporter. There could be a situation where a direct exporter receives an abnormally big order, which he cannot process in given time. He then can ask some other manufacturer to provide the product to him for export. This second manufacturer is the indirect exporter. An indirect exporter can also be engaged if direct exporter needs some supplementary product to combine with his main product. For example, a cell phone manufacturer may ask a cell phone charger manufacturer to provide chargers for his cell phone, which are to be exported. So the second point to be remembered is that the exporter could be a direct exporter, or an indirect exporter. Keep this point in your mind. We will use it later. Payments to be received from exports are secured through letter of credit. This is abbreviated as LC. We will talk about LC in detail in a separate video. The payment against LC is received by authorized dealers in foreign exchange. These dealers are actually the commercial banks, which have been authorized by the State Bank of Pakistan. These banks issue a Form E, in which details of foreign currency to be received and some other details of export transactions are mentioned. There is another type of export against which proceeds are not received in foreign currency. There is a special arrangement for export of goods to Afghanistan, whereby goods are exported without Form E, and export proceeds are directly received by the exporters in local currency. Which means that the authorized dealer in foreign exchange will not be involved in such export to Afghanistan. So our third learning point is that export proceeds could be realized either in foreign currency, which means after issuance of Form E, or it could be realized in Pak rupees without involvement of authorized dealer in foreign exchange. Keep it in your mind. We will use it later. Now we talk a little more about letter of credit. LC mechanism gives a comfort to the supplier that his payment is secure. Hence the exporter has this peace of mind that on successful delivery of goods, there will be no default and payment will be received. An LC can be opened with a bank not only for export, but it can also be opened for local transaction. This LC is called Inland Letter of Credit. The proceeds of direct exporter were secured by an LC. On basis of this LC, the direct exporter and indirect exporter can open an inland letter of credit. Since this inland LC has been opened on basis of export LC, hence it is called Inland Back-to-Back Letter of Credit. Payment to indirect exporter can be made through this inland back-to-back letter of credit. In this way, indirect exporter will also have a peace of mind that his payment is secure. The direct exporter and indirect exporter may also opt not to open a letter of credit with the bank and settle their payment through cross-check. In 1999, State Bank of Pakistan decided that the direct exporters who would make payment to their indirect exporters through checks shall issue a formal standardized purchase order (SPO) to indirect exporter. The SPO would enable the indirect exporters to have access to the financing facilities from commercial banks. This transaction made under SPO is also called sale under a firm contract. So our fourth learning point is that transaction between direct and indirect exporter could be either on basis of an inland back-to-back letter of credit or on basis of a firm contract. Now we move to our main presentation. Keep the 4 learning points in your mind. An export business could either be an export processing zone or not an export processing zone. In case business is not an export processing zone, then you could either be a direct exporter or an indirect exporter. In case of indirect exporter, sale to direct exporter could have been made on basis of inland back-to-back letter of credit or on basis of a firm contract. In case of direct exporter, export proceeds could have been realized in foreign currency or in local currency, that is, export without Form E. In first case, tax will be deducted from exporter by Export Processing Zone Authority at the rate of 1%. Click on gray box to know the rate of tax. Let's move back to presentation. This tax will be collected at time of export. In case of sale by indirect exporter on basis of back-to-back LC, tax will be collected by the bank, which has opened the LC for indirect exporter. This tax will be deducted at time of realization of funds from direct exporter. In case of sale under firm contract, the tax will be deducted by the direct exporter while making payment of goods to indirect exporter. In case of exports through Form E, authorized dealer in foreign exchange will deduct tax at time of realization of Forex proceeds. In respect of goods exported without Form E, the collector of customs shall collect the tax at time of export. All above taxes collected, either from direct exporter or from indirect exporter, will be final tax on their income. However, they have a choice not to opt for final tax regime. In case of opting out of final tax regime, the tax deducted will be treated as minimum tax. This option will be useful only in case of loss-making export business. The loss could then be set off against a profitable local sales business of same person, or could be carried forward, or could be utilized as group relief under Section 59B. You must read about today's discussion in Income Tax Ordinance. We hope you have got the idea of this transaction and its taxation. Your questions are welcomed in comments section. See you all in our next video.